Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Even those who had a bad memory for faces usually remembered her at once. Maria had eyes of different colors, one light brown, almost yellow, the other blue, and a birthmark on her temple. A small one, shaped like a cat's paw. Archie called her Mirka. She's Maria. Different eyes, like a cat, mark on her temple. It's a long way from Maria to Mirka, but that was Jenka's name for her. No one ever repeated it after. It turns out they lived in neighboring yards, but a little apart in time, only 10 years. In adulthood, nothing. In childhood and adolescence, a whole era. She was still a student of elementary school, with puffy bows and short, thick braids, when he graduated from school and entered the helicopter school. He knew he would leave home anyway. In their family, all the men were military. His father was waiting for his son to enter the Military Technical Institute, which was 40 minutes away by public transportation. And Archie wanted to go to the end of the world because he could not watch his father beat his mother. Moreover, even when Archie grew up and could twist his father into a ram's horn, his mother did not let her stand up for herself. She loved him with such a crazy love, and there were no sweeter moments for her than when his father sobered up and knelt to apologize. Archie realized that sooner or later he would either kill his father or go mad from this sick life. He could never read afterward, finding cross echoes in the suffering of the characters and the people closest to him. After graduating from the school, he managed to get to Afghanistan shortly before it was over. He came back without a single wound, only a lot of gray hair. But he was light blonde, and it didn't show up. It's just his hair was a little ashy, and his soul too. He was invited to teach at his native school, and he agreed. And in a neighboring town, they opened a pedagogical institute with a special focus. Here you have the traditions of the old days in spirituality and form, and twice a year, balls. One Christmas ball in winter, the other on Trinity. Ballroom dancing was an optional, but compulsory, elective at the institute. We practiced all year long, no matter how well we did. Don't blame us. And you had to come to the ball according to the dress code. In a floor-length dress with gloves, and some girls also took fans. Did you also immediately imagine girls? And rightly so, there were not many young men here. Well, mathematicians, physicists, but among philologists, there were girls. In ballroom dancing class, they questioned the teacher. We'll dance with each other at the ball, won't we? Natalie shrugged, but said, I guess the rector will think of something. And the rector came up with an idea. Agreed and made an order to the helicopter school. Because the military, he must be not only handsome and big, but also must be able to dance at least a waltz. Maria, aka the future Mirka, did not want to go to the ball at all. Because inexperienced in old-fashioned dresses, girls did not sew and did not buy themselves even dresses, and as one clung to the wedding. That's the glitz and glitter, nothing could be better. Someone borrowed such a dress from friends, someone rented, someone bought. In short, only they had a chorus was 24 brides, and the place of the maid of honor cipher could pin the inscription, I want to marry. Maria at that time did not like to go near a mirror at all. Labeled bin, or labeled for real, bores. How many times she wanted to remove that damn birthmark. Her mom had taken her to the hospital when she was about 10, but the elderly dermatologist had shaken his head and said, it's best not to touch it. And don't tan or traumatize it at all. My mom in general had a scattering of these black spots running aslant across her shoulder, and my mom was afraid they would rebirth. She was always afraid of some gruesome diagnosis, and she made a promise to Maria that the sign given to her by nature would not be touched. Never, as long as you live in the world, for me. So what do we have? Different eyes like a cat, plus a black spot. What are you talking about? Maria was the worst at dance lessons too. And again, Mom insisted you go, agreed with her friend, who in the House of Culture led the theater circle, and she lent her dress. A simple blue silk, floor length. Nastenka from Morosco wore it when she went from the status of bored stepdaughter to favorite bride. But being at the ball, Maria immediately realized that the grooms will not even look in her direction. When the dance began, she tried to hide behind the backs of teachers, and from there she watched her classmates twirling in the arms of cadets. And then, to take a break, students and cadets started a game of mail. Maria took on the role of letter carrier, carried notes from boys to girls and back. There was a lot of laughter. The girls sometimes blushed, as once their young great-great-grandmothers. And Maria was glad that she would be spared all this waiting for the note and the disappointment that no one had written to you. And just a glimpse of the commander of the cadets, or what they call that uncle who brought them. He stood a little further away and looked at his students from there. His face was still young, but his hair was gray. But when the waltz began, and Mary again wanted to slip away into her quiet corner and be invisible, she found this man standing in front of her and asking her to dance. The first thing she was ready to say was, No, I don't dance. I don't know how." But next to her was Natalie, who had agonized with them all for half a year, and Maria did not dare to publicly sign that she had never learned anything. And she also wanted to tell her beau that she was wooden and would give him all her legs and everything. But he had such strong hands, and he so confidently and simply led her, without any of these twists such as twirl ladies, that the dance seemed natural to Maria, as if she had learned it from childhood. She even wanted to cover her eyes for relief. She could dance with him and with her eyes closed. That later they would find out that they were both from the same town and even from neighboring yards and graduated from the same school and try to remember each other. She seemed to see him with other boys on the pond with a fishing rod, and he seemed to remember her with the girls on the swings or jumping rope, or maybe she was jumping in the classics. Whether those swings and jump rope were there is completely irrelevant. But the fact that he would wait until she graduated from the institute, and the fact that among her classmates with all their crushes and jacks, she alone knew that out of all 6 billion, or how many people on earth, she had found the only one she was meant for. That's all that mattered. She left for him the day after she got her diploma, to a small gray town, 3/4 of it made up of own and 2-story houses. There was no theater or museum, and the helicopter school was the main attraction. A year later, their son was born. Archie dreamed of a daughter who would be like his wife. He wanted it to be 2 Merkas. When the boy was born, the midwife who delivered him sighed. "Well, here we go, another single woman." "What?" Maria didn't understand. "Who?" "You. Your son will grow up and someone else will take him. A wife. And you'll be alone. So come back for your daughter." But Maria didn't come for her daughter. Archie died. Ridiculous. A rookie chauffeur from the school awkwardly backed his truck and pinned Genya against the wall. They still managed to get him to the hospital, but there was a scheduled operation. Someone was having a beautiful nose made. None of the surgeons could get free, and there was not much the nurses could do. The doctors came when it was all over. However, they would later say that there had been no chance from the start. Mirroring the mirrors in the house, Maria looked at herself and thought that Archie had left the gray hair to her as an inheritance. Now she had hair just like his. And she also felt sorry that in his time Archie had not allowed her son to be named after him. So, it would have sounded like a native name in the house. Maybe it was for the best that he hadn't. They say you can't have 2 people with the same name in the family. One would leave. If there were 2 Archies, she'd be blaming herself right now. Archie's fate was not to die in the sky, but to die on earth. May John have a different fate. Maria raised her son like any other single mom, tough as can be. But every morning, the strength to live another day is found from somewhere. Maria knew she would never marry again. It was as impossible as resurrecting Archie. She stayed in this town where they remembered her husband and said John looked like him. When her son got older, she went with him to visit his mom. John met the boys in the yard. Word got around, and he told them that his father was a pilot and died. The kids started laughing at him. Not laughing, but really laughing like a fool. Do you really believe in such fairy tales? Your father just abandoned you. He didn't need you and your mother, or your mother doesn't even know whose son you are. John was taken away by the neighbors. He threw himself at the boys, and of course they all threw themselves at him. Mary washed the blood off her son's broken face, smeared bruises and abrasions with green and cried. "For God's sake, don't mess with them anymore," she pleaded. "Or someone else will accidentally hit you in the temple with a stone," said her grandmother, a hardened optimist in big quotes. "They're small, they will be nothing, and we will lose you. But I can't listen to them talking about Daddy like that." About you and Daddy, John was unusually serious, and Maria looked at his eyelashes. They were long and long, just like Archie's. John had not inherited his father's fate, Genia was drawn to the sky, his son to the earth. Maria thought later that the boy had developed a passion for all sorts of rocks when they went to the sea. Maria worked at the school, Vel Literatura. She had a long teacher's vacation. Maria took her son, and they went somewhere in a quiet seaside village, not all fashionable and not promoted. They didn't need much. The sea, hot southern air that smelled of pine needles and roses, and each other's company. If John had been given a free will, he would not get out of the water. Maria realized that wasn't the way to do it. Sea baths, sunbathing, everything must alternate. Her son's health was her life. When John was very young, she would tell him, "Sit on the beach for a while. Look how beautiful the pebbles are. You see, there are white streaks on them, traces of the waves. Build a castle out of sand and stones." Maria herself did not notice how her son became fascinated by the whole stone world. Even more, for him it was a stone kingdom, a fairy tale. It was as if carnelians and amber came into John's hands by themselves. When he learned to swim and dive well, he could dive for a stone that lured him from the bottom, from the depths. At school, when the boys went camping, John's backpack was much heavier than the others when they returned. Mary liked to sit next to John in the evenings, when her son showed her the imprints of ancient shells, in unsightly-looking stones, and transparent quartz, and other curiosities that he managed to find. And like his father, John had no doubt after high school, this one to the sky, this one to the depths. Geology and only geology, and with a real passion, John began to engage in speleology to study caves. At first, it drove Maria to complete horror. It seemed to her that her son is incredibly risky stone vaults above his head. Every time going with his companions into the caves, it was as if they were playing a quest, imprisoned alive. It didn't occur to her that John was no longer a tall, handsome boy, that he was in love with his caves the way others are in love with a woman. He came from the institute in summer and winter for vacations, and almost always with one of his friends. The apartment was becoming merry and noisy. Maria stood at the stove. It seemed to her that young people were always hungry. What did they eat there in their dormitory? She wished they ate continuously at home. And in the evenings, they turned out the lights in the room and watched slides. They were captured moments of subterranean travel. Huge halls and cramped screw-rotors, stalactites and stalagmites, fireflies on the walls that turned the caves into the likenesses of galaxies, underground lakes and rivers. And Marie had to accept this mesmerizing world, and it has forever captivated her son. When the cold walls clamp down on you from all sides, don't be sad. The law of the land tests everyone. The darkness and the crowdedness and the roaring rivers and the silence, and the beauty of the earth and the impenetrable wall. And if you've experienced it all, if you haven't lost your strength, if you haven't lost your courage, you'll be recognized by the darkness and the cold of the distrustful depths. That year my son brought a girl, Julia, an inconspicuous bee who seemed to be his companion on these quests. Maria saw less of her son than usual, and she was so looking forward to John. Every day with him was precious to her. But now her son was going out with Julia in the morning, then to show her the city, then to some nearby tourist resort, then just to the movies or to a cafe. And Maria cried herself to sleep in the evenings. Young people drank tea in the kitchen until midnight. The guys left, and Maria turned the pillow so that under her cheek it was dry, not wet with tears, and remembered those already almost forgotten words of the midwife. Here's another lonely woman. It was impossible to interfere with the son. He had his own life. But still, when John said that he would not come to the winter vacation, we'll go on another hike, somewhere in the next caves, Maria asked only, hiding jealousy. With Julia? There's a whole group of us going. Maria thought then that her pain was at the limit of possibility, almost the same as when she lost her husband. Now her son was going into his own life. And then she got the call of disaster. There's been a cave-in in the caves where the boys went. There are dead. John's alive, but in serious condition. He's lying there, miles away from her. And it doesn't look like he's gonna get up. Not a word about Julia. Maria didn't ask. She was scared. Was she trying to tie her son to her? Fate said, "Take that. You won't be able to walk anymore. He'll always be with her, as long as he lives. How long will he live after this?" There was a spirit in the cave. No, it wasn't a spirit. It wasn't that scary. There was a creature living in the cave. It looked human, but it wasn't human. Julia thought she had recognized it the very first time she had been brought to her grandmother's house in a remote Siberian village. How old had she been then? 3 years old? Mom was against it. Why drag Julia halfway across the country, into the middle of nowhere like that? She's a baby. You never know what's gonna happen. It's a long way to get to a doctor. It was about her mom, Julia's grandmother. Come on, Daddy was as carefree as ever. She's a tough girl, but what a trip, what an experience. And there was a train a few days on the road. A little rubber doll whose outfits Julia had packed in matchboxes. The top shelf, the scenery floating outside the window, the swaying pillow, and the special dreams when you fall from one dream into another. Never again did Julia sleep as soundly as she did on the road. Then, year after year, her parents brought her to her grandmother, and for several days they enjoyed the air so pure that it made her dizzy. We went to the river, but the water was cold. It was not the southern seas. They tried to pick mushrooms, but were ungodly confused about the edible and poisonous ones. Gave up and went back to their city life, promising Julia to come and get her by the end of the summer. Grandma Leslie didn't dust off her city granddaughter, didn't try to please her. Julia immediately joined a group of peers who played in the village streets, and having run for the day, greedily, like a wolf cub, ate in crumbly porridge and mushroom stew and potato cakes, all the simple grandmother's food. When she was older, she even learned from her grandmother how to make clear lollipops on sticks, that penny treat so prized by children throughout the ages. But Julia, almost from the very beginning, began to realize that life in this village is different from the usual rest of other children in the villages at their grandmothers. First of all, the forest around here was so thick and stretched for such distances that both children and adults understood that it was impossible to joke with it. It was not difficult to get lost in the taiga, and in cold weather you could freeze in a matter of hours. Here you could fall into one of the rivers, not wide, but damn deep with steep banks and a fast current. You can't get out without help, and even with help, there's no telling how it would turn out. And here it was real to wander into a swamp, which was not marked on the map, to meet a bear or wolves. But the most mysterious in any case for Julia were the caves. One of them especially beckoned both locals and visitors, but it could only be entered from the water. And strangely enough, this natural obstacle had saved some lives. Not everyone reached the rock above the river by boat. The entrance to the cave was only just above the water level. That's in summer. In winter, no one ventured into that wilderness, and in spring the cave was completely flooded. If you were stubborn enough and got a boat, you could swim up to the black gaping mouth, go inside, and find there a series of low chambers that connected the lasers. Imagine a kind of beads in reverse, where instead of beads, just voids. Each next chamber was smaller than the previous one, and narrow wells, inaccessible for a man, and organ pipes, funnels washed with water, stretched to the surface. There were also some stalactites, but they were not particularly picturesque. It is not worth talking about them. But in the sixth, penultimate chamber, an underground lake was waiting for you. It seemed to be quite small, about 4 meters, but you shouldn't try to walk across it like a puddle. At the bottom of the lake there was another passage, and it went sharply into the depths, into the 7th chamber, completely flooded. And that is where, according to local legends, the treasure was kept. Once here came speleologists, tried to get to the 7th cave with scuba diving, but tortured, and decided not to risk too narrow long passage. It is easy to get stuck in it. The water is murky, very dangerous. And it is unlikely that there is something interesting there, they said to the local guys, who eagerly questioned them, and so hoped that in the 7th, still at least someone will penetrate. In legends about treasures, speleologists did not believe at all. Yeah, one of them jacked, said skeptically, where would they come from? There used to be no TV or internet, so people invented an occupation to look for treasures. What's up? It's not bad to get rich for free. Where I live, we'd also have a lot of stuff on the river, and aliens have hidden a geomachine in the Jiguliv Mountains. Cool stuff, can transport you to other galaxies. And there's an ice cave somewhere where mammoths stand frozen. And an ancient amoeba lies under a river, and inside it there's an underground passage from one bank to the other. Listen up. The locals were disappointed beyond belief. The speleologists left, and the next summer Harry still dived to the bottom of the 6th, and unexpectedly for everyone pulled out a scrap of ancient jewelry. 4 ruby pendants on a gold chain. How he'd gotten them, God knows. That gold and real stones, not some bullshit, was confirmed. The pendants seemed to be transferred to the city museum of local lore, but then nobody saw them in the exposition. Disappeared. Well, and of course, Harry's find for a short time started a real underwater pilgrimage, when everyone hoped to get something on the bottom and maybe even get to the 7. But a few weeks later, what was inevitable with this approach happened. Mickey drowned, caught on something in the underground, and at the same time underwater passage. And since then, although Mickey was buried a long time ago, the other guys were afraid to dive in this place. A new legend was born that the treasure was now guarded by a drowned man. They say he's dead and will kill others. As for the treasure, it was attributed to either local robbers or those, cunning, who hid some of the world-spreading jewelry of the royal family. Leslie's grandmother was lenient about the cave. Once she said to Julia, looking at her granddaughter over her glasses, "Well, you're a smart girl, won't you go there?" Julia twisted her head, which meant no, of course. That was the end of the matter. But here's another time. Then the girl burned hard. She for the first time saw grandmother Anastasia frightened beyond belief. It happened when the boys went for berries. They were accompanied by 2 invariable parental punishments: not to wander into the swamps and to look under their feet. Vipers, you know. The children had wandered unaccustomedly far, but that was not the reason for Julia's trouble. When everyone realized that they were already tired and it would take several hours to get home, they decided to take a break. One could only wonder that a city girl was more restless and hardy than the village boys. 3 girls and 2 boys settled down to rest on the bank of the river on an improvised small sandy beach. Here it was possible to bathe. The cold water washed away fatigue, and to have a snack. And then the guys just lay down, with their eyes closed, exposing their faces to the sun. Julia was interested in the river, which curved here and there. So what's around the next corner? Julia went without saying a word to anyone, and left so quickly and quietly that no one noticed. The girl walked along the narrow bank, turned there then here. Soon the strip of the bank almost disappeared, the cliff and further the river, and Julia wanted to go back. And then she noticed that a little higher up on the bank there was a withered tree, reminiscent of a man raising his hands to the sky. And right behind this tree the entrance to the cave was low and narrow, more like a crevice, half overgrown with grass. Julia made up her mind. She walked over, pushed the grass apart, and stood on the threshold. The sun warmed her back, and the darkness ahead breathed cold damp, and even a kind of wind that came from the depths. The darkness was thick, dense, like a living thing. And Julia had no flashlight with her, not even a match. And then the girl heard the boys calling her, and the voices were frightened. Julia understood perfectly well why. She is small, she is a city girl, she is not even a pea, but a poppy seed in this forest, if she gets lost. So she responded at once, screamed as loud as she could, and hurried back to the boys. They kept calling out to each other as she got there. But when Julia came back, they were all on her at once. That she was a stuffed fool, and that no one would ever take her with them again, was the mildest of expressions. She tried to justify herself by talking about the cave, but no one would listen to her. On the way back, the older girl, Nancy, defiantly led her by the hand, but none of the boys wanted to talk to Julia. Boycott, all understood. And of course at home Julia couldn't help telling her grandmother about all this. The main thing was resentment at the guys, and the girl cried. But about the cave, and the tree with upraised branches arms, she also did not forget. Leslie, aghast, grabbed her granddaughter by the shoulders and shook her so that Julia's head shook. "Never. Don't you ever go there again. Don't go near that place. Never. Better vipers and bears, God forgive me." "Grandma," said a shocked Julia, "your own eyes are glowing like a wolf's right now. It's from fear. And from crying." Grandmother let Julia go, sat up, leaning on her arm to hide her face from her granddaughter. But Julia noticed that she was really crying. The girl immediately forgot about everything, climbed into her grandmother's lap, and tried to forcefully tear her hands away from her face. "Julia, get off. My knees hurt. Tell me, what's so scary?" Julia demanded. "You wouldn't understand. Can't you just believe me? I'll understand." And then Grandma gave in and told what was really like a scary fairy tale. Maybe others didn't know it, but Grandma's family had always lived in these parts. Great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers, and their great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers. None of their family remembered other places or leaving these places. Julia's mother was the first to leave here. And so all these great and great-great and great-great-grandparents knew that this cave like a ball of yarn stretched far, far underground. No one has reached the end of it, because there are precipices, rock slides, and underground streams on the way. The 6th and 7th caves are a child's sandbox compared to this one. But if you get to the end, you'll see fire. The fire ignites if a living soul appears at the very depths, at the starting point. Its white flame rises up for a reason. While it burns, the living can speak to the dead. The ancestors did not just believe in the sacred fire, they considered it as reliable as the fact that in the morning the sun rises and after winter comes spring. But no one had ever tried to reach the hidden depths. It's a way for the special ones, for heroes, not for mere mortals. And then one of the women decided to go in. No one remembers her name anymore. She was a widow. Her only child had been stolen, maybe lost in the taiga. And the mother rushed into that cave. In that desperation, will you just want to kill yourself? But that is a sin, and someone else should do it. The woman was sure that her child was no longer alive, and she wanted to speak to him one more time before she died, if she was allowed to do so from above. No one doubted that the woman would not come out of the cave. But time passed, maybe a year, maybe 2, and the hunters noticed at the entrance a tall figure in black rags, remnants of a mourning dress. The woman's hair was also black, long and tangled. The hunters thought they saw either the ghost of the deceased or the spirit of the mountain and fled in fright. But later many more people saw the woman, and some dared to speak to her. She never appeared when people went to see her. And then she would again stand at the entrance to the cave and squint her eyes at the light, which she must have long since gotten used to. How had it come to pass that the woman was now able to conjure? She bent over an old man who was lost and weary from hunger and a hunting wound. She bent down and whispered something, and the old man kept saying that he had not dreamed it, her stiff black hair touching his face. And he got up and found the strength to reach the men. From then on, she was called less often the witch, more often the black woman. People went to her when they were desperate to be healed in any other way, or when they were so sick of mental anguish that life seemed dull. It was not always possible to see her, and no one would look for her in the depths of a cave. But when the black woman came out, she helped, and people lived long after she spoke her words over them. People tried to thank her. Some carried her clothes, some an embroidered colored belt, a knife, or some food. But no one gave her anything from hand to hand. She approached only those who were on the threshold of death, whose soul was already hovering between the worlds. People left their offerings on the big stone. Sometimes they would disappear the very next day, and sometimes they would lie there for a long time, and then someone else would take them away. But the years passed, and everyone realized that the sorceress, if she was still flesh and blood, would inevitably grow old and go to the world of shadows. And then one woman brought her a child, her little daughter, whom she had given birth to by a visiting gypsy and had suffered much shame. "Take my child," she pleaded. "No one needs my daughter anyway. She is an outcast. Let her succeed you in time and continue to do good deeds." Later, the poor woman said that it was the only time the black woman came out and took the child from her hands. But it was after that that the terrible things began. "Grandmother," Julia was ready to beg, "tell me what happened next." "It's not the night to bring it up," Leslie said firmly. "Tomorrow. I'll pull myself together and I'll tell you. But you promise me you'll never, ever go near that place again. You'll forget it ever existed." "Grandma, what about the witch?" Leslie was making dumplings. She always made a lot of them at once, just in case. And Julia was allowed to help. She'd already learned how to put in just enough mincemeat for 1 teaspoon. And before she used to put so much stuffing that the stuffing didn't fit into one circle of dough, and we had to add one more, and one more. They were Goliath dumplings. But now the boards are already filled with cute little dumplings, on the stove in a pot boiling water, smells of bay leaf. Soon they sit down to lunch, and Grandma is silent. She rolls out the last sausage of dough. "Well," Julia fidgeted in her chair. Leslie sighed, and apparently decided to end it all, not to return to the conversation. In those places, not far from the cave, they started finding animal remains, brutalized. I'm sorry. They didn't happen very often, or maybe people didn't always notice them. Well, nature is cruel. The only surprising thing was that no large predators had ever been seen here before. As time passed, The old witch was never seen again. She didn't show up last year or the next. Well, everything has its time, and perhaps she had gone to the world of shadows, with which she had been on a first-name basis for a long time, and now she had become a part of this world. But there was someone in the cave, and people, when they went there to ask for things, now took a sacrifice with them. You don't know this yet, but it was once common in many religions. You had to bring something with you, even a live rooster, because the new mistress of the cave believed that people's wishes only came true when not only the mysterious words she spoke, but also blood, or maybe the mistress was just hungry, and she needed not just food, but also the death of a living creature, the spirit of death. It fed her. All this was a long time ago, and I know it only from the stories of those who heard it, from generation to generation. It was said that if you go into this cave, you can see the bodies of not only animals, but also people. And they are all dry, as if sucked out by a giant spider, and that place has its own music. The Aeolian harp tinkles its strings in the wind plays its melody. And here the wind plays too, only not with strings, but with dry bones as old as white fire. It is a veil, and no one passes through it without going mad. I know of only one woman who has ventured into the cave in my lifetime. Note that only women who have lost their children or loved ones have gone in there. No one knows whether she managed to see something, whether her wish to talk to the deceased came true, but it was clear to everyone that she was insane. It happened before your mom was born. She was taken to a psychiatric hospital and never came back. Nothing since. No one knows what's going on inside. Maybe the keepers of the flame take turns. When one gets old, another one takes her place. Or maybe the last one has turned into a wild creature and lives to hunt. Who's going to tell? Those who still remember the whole story have only one thing to be glad: that the cave is so far away that it is almost invisible to the outsider's eye. The only identifying sign is a tree with branching arms. It seems that it has always been dry, as everyone who went to the cave told me. It's an oak tree, and oaks live for hundreds of years. The cave is hidden in the forest, and there's very little chance of anyone finding it and stepping inside. But how far you and the boys went that time? Do you see now why I was so frightened? A chill went down Julia's spine, and they never spoke of the subject again. But now the girl knew that in the forest, not so far from their village for half a day's walk, somewhere in the depths of the cave, lives someone, maybe a woman, or maybe some kind of creature that connects the living with the dead, but takes a terrible fee for it. Later, Julia began to feel as if she had always known this. She didn't choose the geology department because she was interested in the mysteries the earth holds. She followed Natalie, if you could call it that. She had a friend in high school, Natalie, whom Julia had looked up to with rapturous eyes, shadowed her, and never imagined that after high school they would part and go their separate ways. Natalie, in Julia's opinion, could do anything. She had country roots, too, and golden hands. When she went to her grandmother's house in the summer, she would help her not only with traditional women's work in the house, vegetable garden, and barnyard, but she would do anything. She took on the job of laying the stove, helping to re-roof the roof, digging the cellar, and she succeeded in everything. Back in the city, Natalie went to the equestrian club, joined the street magicians for a while, learned all kinds of tricks from them. She never lost at cards, played guitar and sang better than anyone Julia knew, could make a ball gown, and could make any prince's head spin. So he would spit on his kingdom and follow Natalie off to wander the cities and towns with some magicians or jesters. Natalie chose geology, a male, in general, profession. She was not afraid of life and expeditions. The thirst for adventure overwhelmed her, and to fit Natasha's rebellious soul into an ordinary human life was like trying to pour the sea and fit it into a cup. And then somehow the caving club was added to her studies by itself. And there were caves, Sugomite Marble Cave, reminiscent of the Snow Queen, and Skaz Cave with its wavy walls and mirrored floor. Exactly here worked the imagination of the great Jonio Godi. And there was John, who gradually became more important to Julia and more dear and closer even to Natasha. Natalie had her own destiny. Black-eyed Natalie charmed without any difficulty one of the legendary speleologists of their club and planned her travels in the format me and him, remembering Julia only in those moments when her friend turned to her. But John and Julia understood each other half-heartedly. They lived on the same floor of the dormitory, and time passed so quickly that day was intermingled with night as they dreamed, argued, marveled, and made plans. And if they were asked to find a comparison for life itself, they would probably say that it is a huge cave of fabulous beauty. You stand with your head back and cannot find words. And this thirst for life and delight in it was also what united them. But Julia had never told John about the worst fairy tale she had ever heard, or perhaps it was not a fairy tale at all. She didn't tell the others either, but here and with the others she was afraid of being laughed at. As for John, Julia had good reason to keep quiet. She knew the mere stammer to him about the mysterious cave that could not be traversed to the end would set him on fire, and he would decide to do it first, and he would not rest until he realized what mystery the place hid. And that mystery was death. Julia knew that for a fact. They still had time to visit Orishma's cave, to be numbed again by the power of nature, and to feel exactly on another planet. To admire the skillful clay sculptures created by those who had been here before them, and sitting on the rocks, they jokingly made rings out of clay and exchanged them as if the underworld itself had sealed their marriage. They dreamed of wandering the world and discovering different corners of this wonderful world, and then the collapse happened. And what a shame, not even in one of the caves, but in the old tunnels. Their trek was coming to an end when local guides persuaded them to visit the adits that lead to the amazingly beautiful lake. Otherwise, they said, you can't get there. Only through the old adits. They went, seduced by the simplicity and accessibility of the route and its ultimate goal, and ended up buried underground. They could have all died, but someone up above decided that some of them should live. Julia woke up in a small local hospital. A compound fracture of her arm, a concussion. The doctors were telling her what had happened, describing the injuries, but she couldn't understand very well. Her hand hurt so badly that Julia wished it would all be over soon. Her parents were called, and they both came at once. After that, there was a separate room, the best painkillers and other drugs, from which the girl almost all the time slept. When the pain and nausea receded, allowing her to understand something, Julia asked, "Where is John?" Her mother held her hand, and Julia focused on the sensation. She felt small again, and for a moment she forgot everything. But then she licked her lips and asked again, "Where is John?" "He's dead," Mom said. And Julia heard nothing more. Later, when thanks to the efforts of doctors, she began to recover and lay gaunt and pale, but she spoke coherently and understood everything, Julia asked to tell her how it had happened. Her parents said that 3 people had died. John was the last to be taken out. His condition was completely hopeless. He was sent to the region by Aviation, and then her mother took his body back to her hometown. "I want to talk to her." Julia's voice was barely audible, rustling. "Please," Mom said softly, "don't. His mother wants to pull away from all of us now, so she won't be reminded of anything. Maybe she thinks that John didn't go into those adits by himself. He was persuaded by those around him." Julia closed her eyes as she pictured John's mother, a small woman with such magical eyes. No one else Julia had ever seen like them. She knew this woman had only one son left in her life, and now she had become the most beggar of all beggars, like Job. Dad left, he had to go back to work. Her mother took Julia to the hospital garden, wheeled her in her wheelchair along the paths. "I can do it on my own," the girl said. "Come on, you'll get stronger first. Build up your strength. You can't fall anymore. I can't imagine coming to the institute and there's no John." "And you're not going back," Mom said. She had a strange tone, either asking or saying, as if she had already decided. "No more geology, no more underground adventures. No more. We'd almost lost you." "Yes, I realize you have 1 year of school left. I don't care about ambition, about anything else. You'll graduate from some medical school or a teacher's school. There'll be work everywhere and always. You'll live near us. We can't do without you. When you get well, I'll take you home." "I'm going to Grandma Leslie's," Julia said. "What?" Mom sounded as if she hadn't heard, and then repeated as if it were impossible. "What do you want?" "If John's gone, I'm going to Grandma Leslie's," Julia repeated, "and you don't have to talk me out of it. It won't help." A month later, Mom put Julia on the train. The doctors marveled at how young people usually recover more easily from injuries. Julia looked as if she was sick, and there was no telling how it would end, whether she'd recover or go to the grave. Only her eyes were left. The girl didn't know how many times her father and mother had argued. Why did you tell her that the guy was dead? For the 100th time her father asked, "We don't know that for sure. We haven't even contacted his family." "Because if he's alive," Mom answered fiercely, He'll drag Julia back into some hole, into some trouble, and she won't get out of it. What if he's left an invalid? In that case, I'm right too. Our girl will recover, will become the same, but you know what kind of conscience she has. She will be attached to this guy for the rest of her life, will take pots out from under him. Can't you see she's in pain right now? It'll pass. It's like ripping the bandage off a wound in one motion. It hurts a lot, but then it goes away. Do you want her to suffer year after year? Thank God she at least obeyed the institute. We'll do without that higher education. There's a medical school 3 stops away from our house. How nice. Let's go there. I'll take Julia to classes and pick her up. I'll never let her out of my sight again. I think you've ruined her life, Dad said sadly. And if John's alive, so is he. Bullshit. It's a good thing you agreed to let her go to her grandmother's. Maybe she'll come to her senses a little. Julia gave me her word she wouldn't leave her grandmother's house. She breathed the air, and those Siberian berries, herbs. My mom understands all that very well. She'll get Julia back on her feet. The word given to her parents now meant little to the girl. Nothing mattered to Julia at all. She showed up at her grandmother's house, and it took Leslie to pull herself together to communicate with her granddaughter as simply as if nothing had happened. She set the dinner table, her incomparable potato scones fragrant and hot, poured Julia some tea. She asked no questions. She told her own simple village news. Who of the girls she knew got married, who had children? A lot of people had left this place. A few old people had died. Leslie was worried that the house was deteriorating, and to fix it needed money, not her small pension. But about that later. Yes, about that later, Julia confirmed. Grandma, tell me, in the time I've been away, has anyone seen the Black Mistress? Is she still alive? Or has anyone heard of her? I have, Leslie began and then stopped. They looked at each other, and each realized what the other had in mind. Maria was in the hospital with her adult son. There was no money for a paid room. The free room was for 4, but often the other beds were empty. John is a heavy patient, and the other patients were uncomfortable around him. Often at night he became bad. We had to turn on the light, call the doctor on duty, and all this catavacha began. You can't rest. If there was a free bunk, Maria slept on it without undressing. If there was no room, she dozed on a chair next to her son, putting her head on the bed. Sometimes after midnight, the nurses let her sleep on a bed in the treatment room. Mary was not chased away. She took on the dirty work of caring for John, washing him, turning him over, changing his linens, taking out the duck. If there was a need, she helped other sick people. Her greatest fear was that the day would come when she would be told, "Go away." She remembered that as a child she had been admitted to the hospital alone, without her parents. It had been dreary and lonely. But it's worse with John. He'll die if she's not there. Her son is alive with her care and her energy, which she gives him all, leaving herself only enough to breathe. What the doctors didn't like most of all was that John's fever wasn't dropping. At first they said, "No wonder, there's nothing left on the guy." But as time went on, the fever wouldn't go away. The prognosis became less and less hopeful. With other patients and those who cared for them, Maria communicated mainly in the corridor at the window, where the dispenser filled plates. She fed Maria without saying a word, and the food always stayed in the hospital. But getting John to eat a few was a challenge. One day, a healthy, handsome boy. In a matter of weeks, he'd gotten skinny, his nose pointy, his muscles melted away. John didn't have the strength to hold his arm up, to take a thermometer. With the relatives of the heavy patients, Maria felt on the same page. Both hers and theirs, everything hung in the balance. But sooner or later other patients began to recover. John did not, and Marie was moved to tears. For the first time in years, she felt the pang of longing for her husband. Worse than when he died. Then she'd been kind of stunned. She couldn't understand a thing. Now she wanted more than anything to go to the cemetery, sit on a bench, howl at the top of her voice. Then maybe Archie would hear and do something to make sure her son lived. She believed her husband, who was in other worlds, had more power than she did. John confused day and night. Instinctively, he was afraid of the dark, sometimes lying with his eyes open until dawn. Maria was afraid to doze off for even a moment. As long as she could talk to her son, it was like a gift from above. But what if he would soon be gone? The hospital became Maria's home. From the terrible nervous tension, she began to smoke, and often at night went down to the first floor, stood at the entrance where ambulances brought people. She already knew which of the two showers in the bathroom worked better. She had learned to unlock and lock the door to the small balcony at the end of the corridor, a real swallow's nest. But on a sunny day, it was a pleasure to get out here for a few minutes and stand looking at the forest and the river visible behind it. The hospital also had a kind of winter garden. There were a few palm trees in tubs in the recreation room, and a soft armchair nestled against the wall behind them. Napping here for half an hour, if John was all right, was a real treat. Sometimes the fifth-floor patients wandered into the trauma room. Well, not really patients. The fifth floor was for cosmetic surgeries. It was all women. Ladies usually went in pairs, discussing who is satisfied with the new shape of the nose or ears, and who is dissatisfied with the result. Once one of the patients, about Masha's age, tried to flirt with her. She looked at him like he was crazy, and he withdrew embarrassed. Finally, the day came when the attending physician told Mariah that John's life was out of danger. John's life was. Everything else was God knows. More than anything, Marie wanted to collapse, fall asleep, and sleep for 3 days. But she couldn't. Her son required the same meticulous care as before. Still, Maria decided to give herself a vacation for the evening. She called her friends and agreed to meet at a cafe near the hospital. Maria had two close friends, Barbara and Angelica. Maria remembered Verina's phrase, "In any unclear situation, cook soup and love yourself." Her friend got the full brunt of it. Weak children. They had the thickest cards at the polyclinic. Parents who got sick one after the other. A husband who was happy to play second fiddle in the family, doing what Barbara said. And if he had his way, he wouldn't get up from the couch. For many years, Vera had to take care of everything herself, be responsible for everything, and keep everything in her head. And there were times when she almost turned into a hunted horse, and it was always a moment before Barbara could stop. It was as if she'd step aside and let life flow by in a rushing stream. Barbara would get up to the stove, and she would take her time, giving herself over to the task at hand, and make soup. Each time without a recipe, improvising. She stewed the vegetables, put them in the golden, fragrant broth, made homemade noodles, finely chopped herbs, and the first plate she filled herself, ate for a long time, savoring every spoonful. Soup should be cooked not only on water, but on love, she would say, if someone happened to be nearby, joined her at the table, and marveled at the flavor. And then, Barbara would pick up a book, exactly a book off the shelf. No internet, just the rustle of the pages. No world outside the window, just a soft pillow, cozy light pouring from the lamp, and instead of reality, dreams and dreaming. It gave strength for the next day to get into everyday life and to pull her wagon onward. It was vital for Marie to hear these words from Varia now. Stop. Take a breath. Feel that you yourself are still alive, and then the strength will begin to arrive. Angelica's role was an outsider's view. Skinny, tall. Angelica is not at all good-looking, but at one time successfully married her spouse and a few years became rich. Angelica realized that the whole family is kept on him and obeyed without complaint. Even a daughter did not dare to call the name that she liked and agreed to that chosen by her husband. But the house became a full cup. In winter, Angelica went in a fine mink coat to his heels, and in the summer the family traveled to Europe. Angelique felt the spirit of the times. Maria knew when her friend would express her opinion, equals it meant that this is what all decent people would think of the situation. Maria hadn't been to this cafe yet. She seldom looked in such places to save money. But Angelica was never lost, and in a minute a waiter was already standing next to them. Barbara ordered ice cream, Angelica ordered cheesecake and coffee, and Maria, hungry after her hospital meal, ordered spaghetti. "The main thing is that John survived," Barbara said, "and the rest will follow." "What's the outlook?" Angelica asked. "He's not likely to walk, and it's like nursing a baby." Maria had no energy to hide it from her friends. "You should put him in a home for the disabled," said Angelica. "You can't work, you won't have anything to live on, and you'll probably need expensive medication. Plowing at school during the day, and the rest of the time to take care of a heavy patient you cannot pull, you will burn out very quickly. Would you like a drink?" Barbara asked, and without waiting for her friend's answer, she ordered a brandy and an appetizer. John was discharged from the hospital after a month and a half. At that time, it was clear what he and his mother would have to go through. At home, it is necessary to reorganize the whole life for the invalid. and John would inevitably become depressed, and it would be necessary to cope somehow to endure. Maria went back to school. Barbara was right not to work. It had been hard for her before, but Maria loved what she did. She fell asleep with her notebooks, which she had not had time to check, and got up at 5 in the morning to prepare for the day ahead. It was impossible not to get attached to some of the kids, and Maria that she only had one child. So much in these children was greedy curiosity. So often she smiled at their funny words. So close to her heart took their work saddened or happy, that she felt the boys were almost kin. Maria realized that although literature is like a boundless ocean, but not enough of it to school children. You need authors who speak the same language as the children and answer exactly those questions that concern them. She spared no time for extra classes, went with her students to the movies, could sacrifice a lesson to discuss some book novelties. The children missed her and waited for her to come out because the school year had already started. But when Maria appeared in the teacher's room and began to catch the pitying looks of colleagues, she realized how much she had changed. She stood in front of a large mirror that hung on the wall, began to paint her lips, and saw a gray, gaunt face, hunted eyes. "We have collected money here." The head teacher came up to her with bills in her hands, for medicines, for diapers, for whatever is necessary, just a little bit. And not so long ago, they were all admiring John, and looking at the pictures Maria had brought, and envying that she had such a son. Handsome, athletic, smart. For diapers, Maria nodded, hid the money in her bag, and her eyes filled with tears. Even more immediate was the reaction of the children. Although they were happy and surrounded the teacher, and some even threw their arms around her, still the children noticed with concern. "You've gotten so thin. Your son is sick, and you too, right? Is he alive or dead?" Maria had to gather strength to start the lesson and behave as usual, to speak with the same intonation. Do not forget anything and hold out until the bell. The first night when Maria came home, almost falling from fatigue, she received a call from the most scandalous of moms, who did not hesitate to dial the number of the class teacher, even if it was already 10 o'clock in the evening. "I'm not just calling," she snapped, if someone reminded her that teachers also have a working day, and it's over, so I have some important questions. Don't shut me up, I'm a mother. This time the mother was complaining that her daughter was being charged for meals, even though Lucy would no longer eat in the school canteen. "Anna, I remember this story very well." Maria could barely move her tongue. "Lucy has a debt from last year. Those who work in the canteen have to pay back, not from their own money to compensate for the shortfall." The woman's indignant voice echoed in the back of Maria's head. Lucy could never eat it. And now your Lucy is asking the boys who eat to bring her some bread from the canteen. Maria snapped for hardly the first time. Then she threw down the phone and cried, but only John could be depressed. Maria simply had no right to be. A few weeks later, with a whole packet of papers, John's card, his x-rays, medical reports, Maria went for a consultation with a professor who was said to be the first after God. She paid a fabulous sum for the appointment, and there were people sitting in line at the office who had paid the same amount of money. The line was big, but it moved quickly. Probably the professor was really a corifeus in his business. 10 minutes was enough for him to make a final verdict. However, when it came to her, and Mary started to tell the gray-haired nobleman how John felt now, and tried to ask questions that worried her, the professor stopped her with a gesture. He was leafing through the notes Maria had brought, reviewing the results of the tests, but he was doing it rapidly, as if he were shuffling cards. "You probably realize by now," he glanced at Maria, "your son will never walk. In fact, the effects of the injuries will become more and more pronounced over time. If you want to know the prognosis, prepare for your son to live about 5 years. And nothing can be done." Maria's voice trembled. "And if we raise money, we'll go abroad for treatment." "Don't be ridiculous. Why are you pinning such hopes on these foreign clinics? Recently, a mother took a boy there, almost hopeless. They took about 10,000 in our money just to make him a diet, and the examinations and treatment. You have so many rich acquaintances that you hope to raise millions. And that kid was brought to us to die anyway. Call the next one, please." Maria walked back. She couldn't imagine getting on public transportation with that face. It was hard to walk, very hard. Her legs wouldn't listen. Then for some reason her eyes caught sight of a homeless man. He was still young and without both legs. On this unusually cold day, he was leaning on his cart against the wall of the house. He was wearing only a calfskin, no jacket, not even a sweater. Maria took out her wallet and put a bill in the cap that lay on the ground next to his cart. Before that, there were only small coins there. But it was worth it to step back a few steps, as the homeless man said in her back. Go to a village called. You'll get help there. Maria stopped, and only then slowly turned around. What did you say? She asked back. He repeated the name of the village. How do you know that I... She was choosing her words. You stink of death, he said. Go. There's no other way out. What are you up to? Leslie asked her granddaughter. If she erases the boundaries between the worlds, maybe she will not only allow me to talk to him, but also agree to exchange me for him. Julia spoke exactly to herself. I have no other victim for her. It's just me. How long have you been thinking about this? As soon as I found out John was gone, Julia said. The girl was silent for a moment. Then she said, looking her grandmother straight in the eye, I'm not going to ask your permission, and I won't let you hold me back. Leslie held her gaze. There's no stopping you in these matters. Julia thought she misheard, but that's exactly what Grandma said. I know that's where those who would otherwise kill themselves go. But wait, give yourself time, because there's nothing you can do about it later. You're only in your early 20s. Don't you believe you'll love someone else? And isn't the whole point of life only in love, except for love? Their eyes met again, and in Leslie's voice there was an infinite longing. I know you won't even come up to say goodbye. I will, Julia said. She knew that before she could leave at all, she had to be in this place to try it on. The soul must be in such a state that there would be no regrets, no hesitation. Strange. Now it seemed to Julia that the bitterest thing for her would be if there was nothing in the cave, only stone walls. If the whole story was a hoax, a legend, and there was nothing more to hope for, only that they would meet John after her own deadline had. What nonsense! Julia said to herself. First, this has not happened for 1,000 years. Secondly, you want to meet her. And finally, she can't just tear you apart, even if you are willing to sacrifice yourself. A black woman has to give something in return. Sacrifices. She remembered the village animals. When Julia came here on vacation, she treated all the four-legged animals the way she would have treated cats and dogs in the city. It was a great relief to the girl that her grandmother kept no rabbits, no pigs, no steers, in short, no animals that could be seen on the table. Leslie had chickens and a rooster in the henhouse, so colorful that he seemed to the girl like a fairy tale. His shrieking woke Julia in the morning, but she was not angry with him for it. And her grandmother also taught her granddaughter to collect eggs, and the little girl liked it terribly. Her grandmother had a white goat, an old, hornless goat, so calm and wise that she no longer needed any friends. The goat was milked not so well, but a jug of milk was always in the refrigerator, and during the summer on such food, homemade eggs, milk, bread, and vegetables, Leslie literally blossomed. Once, when the Eastern calendar expected the year of the goat, a reporter came from the city with a camera. She needed a picture for the front page. The girl was brought to Leslie's house, and then they all went to the barn at the squirrel. Didn't you forget to paint her eyelashes? The neighbor who accompanied the journalist asked the grandmother. Velka's photo decorated the New Year's issue of the newspaper. For Julia in the summer, all of her grandmother's animals became friends. Unintimidated chickens allowed to take themselves in their arms. You could cuddle up to the warm side of Belka and tell her your secrets directly into her long ear. The gray dog Volchok, who never sat on a chain with delight, accompanied the girl on walks. And if the village children told about the fact that the farm slaughtered a goat or sent to the soup rooster, Julia was ready to cry, and her new friends twirled their fingers at the temple city, Malahonaya. The girl walked along the narrow strip of shore, sometimes stumbling into the water, rounding turn after turn. Suddenly she shuddered. In front of her was the same small clearing, and a withered tree was raising its arms branches toward it, as if in a gesture of despair. And the entrance to the cave was so overgrown with wild shrubbery that Julia did not see it at once. She was afraid it was gone. There was no way. A cave-in. She shuddered. But then she saw a crevice, a black crevice that led deep into the rock. Julia would have to go inside the cave for the first time since what had happened to her. But she would no longer enter here as the timid girl she had once been. How many underground roads she had traveled? Would she dare now? Julia walked toward the entrance very slowly, Her nerves were ready to react to any rustle, to any shadow. She was ready to see something. Maybe if the mistress came out to her and there would be no more escape. Julia could believe that the creature living in the black depths commanded the forces of nature. The river would rumble behind her, cutting off her escape. The branches of the trees would close around her. What nonsense! What a game! Julia stopped at the entrance only for a moment and stepped inside. She knew that the heat of the day was about to change to cold, as it always did when there was a mountain overhead. It's normal. Gray stone walls, nothing special. Almost immediately, the underground passage turned to the left and went downward at a slight incline. And there was darkness. Julia hadn't brought a flashlight, and her cell phone was running low on charge. She couldn't go far into the depths right now. She wasn't ready yet. Still, Julia was struck by the glass-smooth floor of this cave. Any footsteps should be clearly audible here. And then the moss beneath the ceiling glowed, exactly the soft glow of a light, alerting someone to her arrival. Maria was getting ready to hit the road. Of course, the most important thing was to find someone who would care for John, and not take advantage of the fact that the guy is helpless as a child, and the mistress is absent. Besides, there were 1,000 other things to do, because if everything went as planned, Maria would never come back. John was on disability. Now, as long as he lived, he'd get a pension. Maria sold everything they could take from her. She kept only what her son would need: a few dishes, bedding, an album of photographs. She sold all her jewelry, although it's funny to say she had jewelry. Earrings, a pendant on a chain and 2 rings, one of them a wedding ring. It was all bought in Archie's time, and now it's in the pawn shop. Maria didn't even keep her wedding ring. She put everything she could get her hands on into an account, in her son's name. All she left was money for a caregiver. The woman whose vena take care of John was a last-minute find. The neighbor's sister turned out to be looking for work. Maria had known the neighbor for years, ever since she'd lived in the house. She knew and trusted her. The last day before she left was the hardest, although all the troubles were over. Everything had been decided, signed, packed, and put away. In the morning, Maria went to the cemetery, to Archie's grave. During the funeral, she had nothing to do. She was half dead herself. And then she regretted that she hadn't cared, hadn't bought a place next to her husband. But there was a place opposite, across the path, near one of the old graves. And earlier Maria kept meaning to go to the cemetery authorities to talk, to buy it for herself, so that someday she and Archie would be near each other again. Almost. And now they won't be. Or was it the other way around, that they would meet soon? Maria sat on the low wooden bench near her husband's monument for a long time. Then she rested her head against it. "I'm so tired," she said through her tears. "I want to come to you so badly. You just help John." From her son, she concealed her imminent departure as long as she could. But it was no longer possible, and Maria introduced him to Sofia, a smiling, full-figured older woman. "Mommy will be back soon," Sofia told John, "but in the meantime, you and I can handle everything. Can't we?" But the son sensed something. "Where are you going?" he asked, and there was alarm in his voice. "To the witch doctor," Maria said in the calmest tone she could. "Traditional medicine has done all it can for you. Let's see what unconventional medicine can do. I've been given the address of a woman who can put the most difficult." "Oh, mama." John seemed to be bitter at her naivety. "What herbs, what incantations, you'll only wear yourself out on the road. I know how much you hate driving." "It's all nonsense, come on." He couldn't even take her hand to hold it. "I'll be back very soon," Maria said nonchalantly, "or maybe I need a change of scenery for a while too. I'll get on the train, get on the top shelf and sleep." "Any word from Julia?" John asked. Maria realized her son was hiding his feelings. When he learned that Julia was alive and recovering, he forbade his mother to call the girl. John realized that he was now a profound invalid, and this ordeal not everyone could withstand. But perhaps he hoped Julia would write or call him herself. Maria only shook her head. "She lives somewhere out there. I don't know exactly where, but she's from Siberia." John closed his eyes. Either he was tired or he just didn't feel like talking anymore. The train was leaving early in the morning, and that was good. Maria stood over her sleeping son for a long time and then leaned over and kissed him like a little boy without waking him. Maria thought about taking some food with her only at the train station, but she didn't have much money with her, and everything here was overpriced. The huge station at this hour, when all the windows in the surrounding houses were still dark, lived its own life, and Maria sat for a quarter of an hour on a soft travel bag, looking at hands so old as if they were 100 years old, and listened to the announcement of the arrival and departure of trains. She had an uncomfortable upper side seat in a parlor car, or maybe it was the best seat. Maria covered the shelf with linen and immediately lay down, turning away from the passage to the window. The next day towards evening, the neighbor from downstairs, a middle-aged man, worriedly touched her shoulder. "Are you alive down there?" "I don't know," Maria said without turning around. "I'll go there tomorrow," Julia thought. Here was the strange thing: always, before any journey, a lot of time was taken up with packing. Everything had to be thought out, down to the smallest detail, because in the mountains, in the caves, these very little things, on which life sometimes depended, were nowhere to be taken. And now that she was leaving for good, she didn't need to take anything with her. Her grandmother did not realize that Julia had already set herself a deadline, and the girl imperceptibly for others summarized the results, summarized things. She called her parents. Mom answered the phone. Julia said she was fine and her grandmother was fine, and her mom asked when she was coming back. "Don't worry, we'll see you," Julia said. "I love you very much." "We love you too." "Oh, my jam is running out." Mom got distracted. "Just a minute, I'll turn down the heat." "Will you tell grandmother she gives us some cranberries and mushrooms?" Julia listened to her mother's voice without thinking about what she was saying and nodded. In the evening, she and her grandmother sat at the table for a long time. Leslie had roasted some large seeds, and with this simple amusement the conversation flowed well. They reminisced about Julia's childhood. "Grandma, I think you're the only one keeping a goat," Julia said. "I don't remember. Did Squirrel ever have a fiancé? Otherwise, where would the milk come from? She sometimes asks to graze with the sheep, and she's probably got a tail somewhere. I used to give away baby goats. But now Squirrel is old and probably won't have milk soon. I won't take a new goat. We've grown old together with this one." Before going to bed, Julia hugged her grandmother tightly, closed her eyes, breathed in her native smell. She woke up at dawn. It was a good time. Everyone in the village was still asleep, but she wouldn't have to wander through the forest in the dark. Julia did not unlock the door, but climbed out through the window. She was careful not to let her childhood friend Wolfie follow her. She didn't want to take him with her as a sacrifice. The final turn. The key was not to hesitate. Julia took a deep breath and clenched her fists so tightly that her palms hurt from her nails. There was the clearing and the tree. And Julia couldn't believe her eyes. And the woman. But not the scary ghost in black. Just an ordinary woman in a crumpled yellow cloak. She stood at the very entrance, with her back to Julia, and seemed hesitant to enter. What the hell is going on? No one had come here for years. The entrance was overgrown with grass, and now two people who wanted to sacrifice themselves had run into each other. Will the mistress choose between the two of them? Or will she ask who's first in line? Or will she eat them both at once? It was black humor from the terrible nervous tension. "Hey!" shouted Julia, though she was still far away. She was in a hurry so the woman wouldn't enter first. "I'm this way too." The woman turned around abruptly. Julia recognized her in an instant. It's John's mother. It took Maria a few moments to realize what kind of girl was in front of her. They stood there, unable to speak to each other. In a theater, they would call it a silent scene. Then Julia licked her parched lips and walked over. It occurred to her that they could have entered the cave together, holding hands, into the witch's mouth, or to the afterlife. "When did he die?" Julia asked. That question explained everything to John's mother. "He's alive," she said. Julia shook her head slowly. It simply couldn't be. She felt that John was no longer alive. Then why had his mother come here if he was alive? Why would she lie to her? "He's alive, but he's hopeless. And I'm here to bring hope." Maria read her thoughts and asked in turn, "And you?" And then Julia realized that she could finally put into words what she had not been able to articulate until now. Still, she stood for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I never believed there was a light," she said, "but here, in this cave, maybe there is. Maybe there's a way in. A portal. Or I don't know what. I came here. I want to be with John. If I left my life anywhere else, drowned myself or jumped off a roof, I'd be gone. and if I leave here, John and I will probably meet. That's why They were both silent again. What would happen next was being decided now. Maria grinned. Then she rummaged in her pocket and pulled out a key. "Do you remember where we live?" she asked. "Don't be stupid. There's nothing for you here. Go to John to nurse him back to health as best you can. I'm going this way." She pointed to the entrance to the cave. "Yeah," Julia said, "and then John will tell me he lost you because of me. That you were set up. I should be the one. You've got a life to live, you fool. John will know how it was." Maria was sure of it now. "Hold the key. Got any money for the trip?" "I didn't bring anything. Empty purse. Not a dime." "Why, if it's all the same? But Grandma will give it to me." Maria didn't hug her goodbye. She only put her hand on her head, as if blessing her. Julia noticed how her face changed. It seemed frozen. It seemed to her that the one who lived in the cave must also have such an expression on her face. "An ancient mask." "Go," Maria said. Julia stepped back a few paces and turned around. She saw John's mom walk into the black void. They would never meet again. But now Julia knew it wasn't all legend and fiction. There was something in the air itself. It was electrified. And now something terrible, otherworldly must happen that would not touch her now. Maria walked slowly down the narrow underground corridor. She'd never been in a cave before, unless she'd gone to the city, and there was a tunnel to the lake. She and Archie had been at the resort a long time ago before the tunnel had been lighted. Then they just walked into the darkness, holding hands and afraid to stumble, supporting each other. And somewhere in the distance, a faint blue light shone on the lake. It wasn't the same here. Maria herself would not know where to go. But ahead, like a faint lantern here and there, the moss on the ceiling began to glow softly. A ghostly green light. Maria walked toward it, and when she reached her destination, the fire went out and a new one flared up ahead. Maria would never find her way out of here. It was a one-way trip, and a very long one. She'd forgotten about time. What did she need it for now? But it seemed to Maria that more than an hour had passed since she had entered the cave. And then, just as then she had seen the lake in the distance, guessed it by its blue glow, now Maria saw a strange light. Yes, it was white, but somehow out of place. She didn't know how to express it better. Unearthly? Maria realized that her journey was almost over. She entered a small hall. In the center of it was a circle of stone slabs, and in it, an outlandish snow-white flame rose upward. One could not take one's eyes away from its play, from the shimmer of its petals. But if one looked around, no, a veil of dry bones that one could not pass through without going mad. That was a fiction. But there were remains here, and Maria remembered the ossuary in Bohemia. Not a gram of flesh, just bones carefully stacked in patterns, or symbols that had their own meaning. Bones of people, or maybe animals too. The last thing Maria saw was a woman. An old, thin woman in a black robe, as if she were a living relic. She sat staring at the fire with her hands on her head. She didn't seem to have the strength to get up. "I thought no one would come here," the woman said. "But it happens all the time. I've come to replace you." "That's right," the old woman nodded, but barely. She was saving her last strength. "The fire needs a living soul. Only then will it burn." "Who are you?" Maria asked. "Who were you before?" "Do you really want to know? This is where it all becomes irrelevant. Before, I had life. Now I'm saving eternity. See how brightly the fire burns. That means my earthly journey is over and my soul is already there." The old woman pointed to the flame. "And when you succeed me, the fire will be small, like a candle. But as the years go by, it will grow stronger and stronger. But back on Earth, you've been forgotten. No one has come here for years. So who needs all this?" Maria hesitated to look at the flame, lest it mesmerize her again. "It's always like this. The one who should take over comes at the very last minute. That's how I came in my time. There's the old mistress." The old woman nodded at the corner of the wall where the bones were mute, a handful of everything. "We take turns and wait, and those who need it, who need us sooner or later, find their way here. Find us? And you kill them?" Not a shadow of anger appeared on the old woman's face. "I know why you asked that. One of us has turned into a true beast. But weren't there never any madmen among the kings of the earth?" The old woman sighed. The fire in front of her had almost gone out, and yet it has the power to raise souls. You take on too much. Any faith. In any faith you would be damned. You misunderstand me. We are not gods. We do not raise from the dead. But those who before did not want to live, who had nothing to live for, after sitting by the fire, revive their souls, because they realize there is no death. But why are you here? Maria asked. If this fire is eternal, can it burn by itself? Its food is not wood. The old woman pointed her bony hand at the flames. It is my soul. From now, just a little bit. And then it will be yours. She looked at Maria from beneath her loose strands of gray hair. And suddenly Maria imagined her as a young girl, very strong and very passionate. There was probably no room for others. Don't be afraid, said the old woman. I know you came here for a reason. For your sacrifice, I have something to give you. And I will. Sit down. This is your home now. Maria sat down beside her, her back against the stone wall. Now watch, the old woman said, nodding at the flames, and everything will be yours. The fire slowly, not steadily, began to diminish. Maria did not immediately notice it. The darkness in the hall was thickening. Maria looked fearfully at the mistress in case the flame went out completely. The old woman was no longer sitting, but lying beside her, a dead bird, a withered body. Now it was up to the new mistress to watch the fire, to feed it with her soul. Soon she would forget everything that had happened in her life, everyone who was dear to her. And the years would pass until another woman entered the cave. A young woman, and she will say, I've come to replace you. But while the mistress still remembered, Maria saw her son. It was night there on earth, and her son was asleep, but she could speak to him in his dream. She saw white fire engulfing him, but it was not a sacrificial flame, but instead healing. Everything that had been fractured, mangled in his body was now unraveling, revitalized, infused with strength. Where did you go? John asked. It was the sorrowful way a child might ask a mother who had died. Who did you leave me for? It's all right, she said, and you and I will live long. And we'll meet again. But where I am now, you need me more than you need me. Trust me. Sleep. And then John was no longer before her eyes, but in the light of the flames she saw Archie. He sighed happily and relieved, as if he had been waiting for her for a long time and she had finally come. Are you going to disappear now too? She asked. No, I'll be with you. Always, when you look at the flames. Something reminds me of this, she thought. The movie Ghost, the white light. She was forgetting everything now. She was forgetting fast. All debts were paid, and even her name would soon be forgotten. But there was someone she loved by her side. The feeling remained. No, it grew stronger, and it was calm, like this unburned, caressing flame. She and he would no longer part in the eternity that awaited them. Time, too, ceased to matter, whether it was hours, months, or years. But she knew that the century she would spend near this flame would not be aimless. Soon a soul destroyed by grief would come here, and here it would find the strength to live. There, at the end of this endless corridor, winter replaced fall. In the clearing on the snow, there were only bird tracks, but the day would come when a fresh chain of footprints would stretch to the entrance of the cave, and someone would cross the threshold. When Julia emerged from the forest, she met some fishermen heading for the river. Where did you go so far alone? One of them wondered, what if there were boars? I saw a couple yesterday. I'm not afraid of anyone anymore, Julia said. Your boar will show you how kind he is. Leslie stood at the gate and looked at the road. Her face was as gray as the roadside dust. Grandmother, shouted Julia from afar. It's all right. Go home. I'll give you some of your drops. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. They hugged each other tightly and stood there without a word, swaying slightly. Julia felt her blouse getting wet from her grandmother's tears. It's all fiction, said the girl quickly. Fiction and nonsense. There's nothing in that cave. And I was in no danger. And I'm going to see John today because he's alive. Grandma shook her hands. How do you know? I met his mom and she told me everything. Julia said like it was the most common thing. Give me money for the trip, will you? If I can't get tickets for today's train, I'll hitchhike, that's all, or walk, or fly. On a broomstick. Leslie clarified and laughed through her tears. A couple hours later, when her granddaughter was ready to cross the threshold with her bag in her hand, Leslie asked her, What should I tell your parents? That I forgive them. It's easy for me to forgive now. And things could have turned out very differently. but I love you most of all of those who are my blood relatives, Grandma. John and I will come and see you. Wait, I want to stay in these parts too, like everyone else in our family. Her grandmother had managed to fill her bag with pickles, jams, and herbs, which she said the sick man needed, but Julia didn't even feel the weight of her luggage. John did not know why his mother left him, and did not believe in any Siberian witch doctor from a distant village. Most likely, Mom had gone to some famous doctors for a second, third, or 10th opinion. We'll take them the last of the money. John had seen things disappear from the house and guess where, but he didn't say anything to his mother because he couldn't stop her. Now that she had decided. And yet he needed her now more than ever because he was more helpless than a baby and terribly lonely. He had no one left but his mother, and she was away and there was no telling when she'd be back. Sophia was kind, cheerful, and did everything to make him feel good. She fried pies, found John interesting movies on TV, and meticulously followed all his medical appointments. She gave him his pills almost minute by minute. 2 o'clock was 2 o'clock. In the middle of the night, she'd set the alarm clock, get up, or the medicine. She was never lazy to wash the sick, change his linen, make him comfortable. Came up to him several times a night to see if he was all right. But John knew that as soon as his mother arrived, Sophia would leave without looking back, and would be happy that her mom paid her well, and the job was over. So he was polite and a little wordy with his nurse, and that was all. No sincerity, almost no complaints. He had gotten used to enduring pain in the hospital and was now a master at that art. His strength was still low, and John often fell asleep. But for some reason this happened all the time during the day, and at night he lay staring into the darkness and tried to fight the longing, which, it turned out, was no easier than actual physical pain. His greatest fear now was that his mother would die before him, and he would be left behind and be a burden to everyone, to strangers who would have to take care of him as a matter of duty. And in the state he was in now, he wouldn't even be able to lay hands on himself. It was as if Sophia had heard and quietly approached him. "It's the second hour of the night. What are you doing up? Does it hurt?" "It hurts," he answered, because this acute longing was making his breathless. Then he realized the nurse wouldn't understand. No, not that. I don't need any painkillers." "How about a shot?" "You don't need a shot. Or should I at least give you a VKP?" "I'm sorry?" "This mixture for sleep. Well, valerian there, motherwort, 5 components. In the pharmacy Come back. You'll be all right now," he heard. "Go back to sleep." And the last thing he realized before he fell into sleep was his question to his mom, "Will I even dream about you?" John woke up and realized it was too late. His whole body was aching. He was sure he had lain down. That's what happens when sleep is deep and you don't move for hours on end. John sat up and stretched his arms out to his sides with pleasure, stretching as enthusiastically as only cats could. All the way down to his fingertips, he was craving coffee. He and his mother had the luxury of buying coffee beans, grinding them themselves, and then putting the pot on the fire. The coffee was so strong, it seemed thick, but instant would have been fine. John had completely forgotten that recently his greatest achievement had been to lift his head from the pillow. The ground coffee was in the same brown tin can where he always kept it. Cheese was in the refrigerator. John put a frying pan on the fire, melted a piece of butter, cracked eggs. He put a lid on everything, and it immediately began to mist. Frequent shuffling footsteps were heard. Sophia almost ran into the kitchen. She must have thought someone else had broken into the apartment. She froze in the doorway. Sophia had forgotten how to cross herself, but her hand did it all by itself. Fortunately, Julia managed to buy a train ticket, the last ticket. Platzkart, side top shelf by the toilet. The downstairs neighbor was determined not to get much sleep. Someone would be slamming the door next to his ear all the time. The neighbor got off at the first station where the train stood for a quarter of an hour and returned with a beer and a fish. The conductor pretended to turn a blind eye. The uncle was apparently quiet and sat far away from her. If anything, we can pretend that the conductor did not know anything, did not know. But the passengers, who were traveling opposite, looked at the man who was cleaning the check-on and pouring himself a foam, with envy, regretting that it had not occurred to them. A woman with a mesh basket walked along the carriage, offering juices, mineral water, chocolate, cookies. In a measured voice, no one took anything from her. "Don't you have any champagne?" Julia asked, sitting down abruptly on her top. and realizing belatedly that she was about to bang her head, shit. She rubbed the top of her head. "When is the next station?" she asked. "In 2 hours," said the man downstairs. "Let's go together. You get the bubbly, I'll get the beer. I'll have finished this 1.5 by then. You're too modest, you'll miss the train. Want some fish?" Julia couldn't eat. At the next station, she and her traveling companion managed to run to the grocery store on the station square. The uncle was the first to get to the cash register with their purchases. "I am the driver of the ambulance. They are waiting for me in the car. Hurry up, hurry up. Now we will go with blinkers." "And champagne for whom?" "It's for the patient, so he wouldn't suffer." Good thing they didn't get beaten up. Julia bought 2 bottles of sparkling wine, that is, the surrogate that passes under this guise. She drank it in cups, like lemonade, and the conductor finally got worried about her falling off the shelf at night. She offered to strap her in like a little girl. At night, Julia stood in the vestibule because she couldn't sleep or even lie down. She only had money left for the bus fare from the station to John's house. But in her pocket she had the key, her most important treasure. She clutched it in her hand and then let it go and only lightly touched it with her fingers, but all the time she remembered that it was there. She had only been here once, but she remembered the house and the entryway and the stairwell. Even the dog that walked in the yard seemed to recognize her. Quietly and easily the key turned in the lock. After all, even if John never got up, the two of them could still do anything. Even soar in a parachute. She would hold him, and the parachute would float above them like painted angel wings. Alive and well, John stood in the middle of the room, stacking things in his bag. "Oh," he said, as if they'd parted yesterday, "I'm coming to see you. I called, your parents. They said you're not here. You're at your grandmother's. They won't give me an address for some reason. You sent me a letter from there once. I was looking for an envelope. Did you find it?" "Nope. But I remembered the name of the village. I think I'll come. I'll ask around. They'll show me where my grandmother's house is." "Listen," Julia said, "I'm starving. I've been drinking for 2 days. I mean booze." "You?" He was amazed. "Anyway, I went to put the kettle on. There was an old woman crying in the kitchen." Julia covered the door and with her eyes asked John who it was. She was, regretting that she had little faith in her life. And today she realized that there is a God. Should I go and join her? Julia asked herself thoughtfully. "By the way, this is from your grandmother. I'm surprised I made it." In the evening they were alone in the apartment. They sat and drank tea with cloudberry jam. Did John remember anything about the past? Julia knew she wouldn't ask him until he spoke. "Listen to the wind outside the window," he said. "That's what?" she protested. "When there's a wind like that where grandmother is, I always think it's going to pick up our house and carry it to the end of the world somewhere. And we've never been to the end of the world, but we've been to other planets. It always seemed to me that all these landscapes we see under the earth are some kind of space, or another dimension altogether, or maybe hell is just around the corner." In the middle of the night, Julia woke up. The wind had died down and John was sleeping soundly beside her. They forgot to turn off the radio, and somewhere far away, in the depths of the apartment, was singing Lucy Bogushevskaya. "For it's winter there again with that white fire. Leave me in paradise, in the midst of love, in the midst of sorrow. I'll sing you everything I learn about him."
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.